It is my privilege to welcome our keynote speaker to the stage. Mark Mills is a physicist and energy expert who has dedicated his career to helping people understand the real-world challenges and opportunities behind our energy systems. He is the founder and executive director of the National Center for Energy Analytics and a published author who brings practical insights to today's most pressing energy debates. He's also a strategic partner in a tech-focused venture fund and previously worked in the White House Science Office during the Reagan administration. Now, Mark, we have an unwritten rule at Basin that says the most important things that we do outside of the four corners of our job descriptions is to tell each other when we are wrong. So please let the crowd know why my caution about the AI boom might in fact be wrong. Folks, please join me in welcoming Mark Mills to Basin's 64th annual meeting.
There we go. Hold on. Thank you. Thank you very much, Todd, and it's a pleasure and honor to be back. And I can answer the framing of your question about whether the AI boom is something you should be cautious about or excited about. The answer, wait a second. Hope you can still hear me. There we go. The answer is yes, both. I mean, self-evidently. And I'm going to paint a picture for you of why the answer is yes, both. And it's because I've been thinking about this issue for a long time. As you can see from the title slide, since I saw all of you last, or many of you, which was 7 years ago, I've written a book. I'm not pitching my book, although when you write a book, you have to pitch your book. But I wrote a book about the answer to this question called The Cloud Revolution. And the book was published a few months before ChatGPT was unveiled. And because of that, the publisher did not want me to put the words artificial intelligence on the title, even though about a quarter of the book is about AI, because he thought it would make it too techy, dweeby, and only computer scientist people would buy the book. Of course, now everybody is talking about artificial intelligence. So you know what they say about investments in books, timing is everything, right? So if I were going to retitle it today, maybe it would be the AI revolution and energy. There's a lot about energy in the book, which I'm going to talk about, because it's relevant to the AI boom in ways that I'm going to explain to you, I hope, in clear, factual ways, not aspirational ways. And the other thing I've done since I saw you last is I launched with some colleagues and support a new energy think tank, a new national energy think tank. In fact, we would claim it's the first national independent energy think tank. And that's also because the issue of energy and how it intersects our economy, as all of you know, is so self-evidently important. The book is about forecasting, and your business, as Todd just outlined, is that you have been engaged at Basin for decades, since your founding, in forecasting. You make your decisions based on forecasts. All of us do that. All of us in our personal lives make decisions based on forecasts. So forecasting is both an art and a science and a form of entertainment, depending on who's talking and how you're doing it. My book is a forecast. It's a book about the roaring 2020s, as the subtitle says. I want to just tell you how I would frame forecasting and how I framed it in my book and how it frames what I'm going to tell you. And I'm going to show you lots of facts and statistics because, well, data matters, facts matter. The reason we are where we are is because of facts, not just because of aspirations. And in thinking about the future, and by this I'm talking about the rules of forecasting technology. I'm not talking about the rules for forecasting political outcomes, but technology. There's really three domains, and only three, that you have to pay attention to. And when you hear somebody making a forecast, whether or not you think there has some possibility of being a sensible forecast. And of course, I'll anchor the framing of that around three famous people. You probably recognize at least one of these people, Einstein on the bottom. That's his statue at the National Academy of Sciences. On the top right, that's Sigmund Freud. You know who he is. And that top left is the statue of Adam Smith in downtown Edinburgh. Of course, he's the father of modern economics and is seen as the father of free market capitalism. So you think about this, a forecast about something in the future will assuredly be wrong or correct, but they'll certainly be wrong if they violate the laws of physics. You can't do what nature doesn't permit. You have to live with the physics of the universe we live in, and engineers understand that, but a lot of PowerPoint forecasters don't. You have to live within the bounds of what the laws of economics are, and I don't mean the arcane, microeconomic, macroeconomic forecasting laws. I mean the basic laws of economics, and that is, if you could put it in the simplest terms, everybody wants the things that are important, products or services, everybody wants those things to be cheaper. And that's just the rule in economics that you can never ignore except at your peril. And then the third one, of course, is the laws of human behavior, which may seem more subtle, but that really isn't. Often you'll hear forecasters talking about something, and in the implicit or explicit framing of their forecast, they'll be saying something about how human nature is going to change. People will do this because of that. They'll change whatever they're pitching requires people to operate differently. Certainly this is true in energy domains, where we're trying to convince people to save the planet by, say, flying less, taking fewer vacations, or suffering the deprivation of the efficiency of, say, your dishwasher, to be very specific about a rule that's been novated and eliminated by the current administration. The laws of human behavior, which is how people like to operate, how they want to live their lives with comfort and enjoy things that are beautiful in nature and in their life. They care about their family. At the broadest level of abstraction, love, hate, wars, all these things have not changed through all of written history. Human beings haven't changed. If they had changed, then none of the stories that were anchored in all of history, the love stories and war stories, they wouldn't be relevant today. Almost all fiction is a rewrite of stories that were written by the ancient Greeks or by Shakespeare. People haven't changed. So many forecasters make the assumption that people will change. Obviously, there's difference in culture, but there's very broad features of humanity that's never changed. So I'll do some forecasting. And I'm going to start out with why I do technology forecasting, and essentially why you're in the business that you're in, which is about this one sort of anchor trend in our civilization. It's maybe the single most important feature and trend of the long march of history, which is the increase of the well-being measured by wealth, because it's the only tool we have to measure well-being. Increasing wealth per capita allows us to do things like educate more people, have health care, enjoy vacations, help our children, live comfortable lives, and improve the beauty of our environment. Through all of history, these things are made possible for more and more people, self-evidently by increase in per capita wealth. So take a look at the United States over these long period of this great country. And when I say that, I say it as an immigrant. I grew up in Canada. I went to university in Canada. My family is from the north. You all are not in the north, even if you think you are. My family is from north of Winnipeg, and I always enjoy being invited back to what I always thought of as the deep south once I come this far. The sun sets far, far later in the summer on June 21st, where my family farm was north of Winnipeg, than it does here. So I mean, it's an interesting transition for America over the last 2 centuries. If you think about it in just one basic measure, and no one has ever come up with a better measure of the direction of general well-being, but wealth per capita in inflation-adjusted terms, accounted for inflation. In 1820 America, this is a painting of the New York Harbor in 1820, the per capita wealth of the country in today's dollars was $2,000 per capita. By 1920, the roaring 1920, per capita wealth was $5,000. It had more than doubled. By 2020, America's per capita wealth in the same inflation-adjusted terms was $60,000. This is the largest expansion in wealth of a citizenry in all of human history. And it's obviously a beneficial thing. What is the difference between America of 1820, 1920, and 2020? Same country, largely the same culture, same geography, same resources, same people, same constitution with a few amendments added here and there. 1920 famously had 2 amendments to the Constitution in 1 year. This is a sidebar quiz. I won't ask you to raise your hands what the 2 amendments were. Never in American history have 2 amendments been passed in 1 year, which would tell you a lot about the social and political tumult of the 1920s, because we always think this time it's different. We have more political tumult today than ever in history. Those are usually said by people who have never read any history. 1920, the 2 amendments were the vote for women, which was very controversial at the time for all the reasons that you might imagine, that did not have to do with chauvinism, it had to do with the kind of politics of the day more than anything. Tennessee, by the way, was the state that put the count over to make the amendment pass. And the second constitutional amendment, which would indicate how insane a nation can actually become briefly, was, of course, prohibition. We actually had a constitutional amendment to ban the consumption of a substance that human beings have used to benefit, not to drive cars, since before written history. I mean, can you imagine what it would take politically to do an equivalent social constitutional amendment today? So we've been through tough times, we've been through political chaos, we've been through wars, but this change in the status of wealth and well-being in this country was driven almost entirely by the advance of technology. Technology drives productivity, productivity drives wealth. This is not that there won't be more wars and have been wars, it's not that politics don't matter. In fact, politics obviously do matter. This is why you have a lobbying arm. You know politics matter. I know politics matter. It's possible to Sovietize an economy. The Soviets proved that in the 20th century and destroyed the kind of growth that the Russian people could have enjoyed at the same rate as the rest of the Western world did. So politics matter, let me just stipulate. But the underlying opportunities for economic well-being come from technology change and progress. So the question you would ask yourself today at the, again, macro trend level, has technology progress stopped? Are we done? Have we invented everything that's going to be invented? There's no more juice to squeeze out of the lemon because we're just done? Or are we continuing at the same pace, or is the pace accelerating? If we continue at the same pace on this basis, by the year 2120, in the lifespans of our descendants, not that far in the future, if you really think about it in macro terms, the per capita wealth in America could be $1 million per capita. That's what this trend suggests, if it's driven by more technology progress. It's what Robert Solow won the Economic Nobel Prize for in codifying and documenting the magnitude and nature of how technology drives productivity and therefore drives wealth. In effect, we invent wealth. We're innovators, we invent wealth by inventing productivity. When we invent wealth, when we invent productivity, we invent energy demands. And this thing about energy that people get backwards is that energy demand is not something that occurs just sort of exogenous to human nature. The invention of energy demands is the invention of the products and services and technologies that generate well-being and wealth. And you measure it in dollar terms, which is the best way to do it, in my opinion. I'm a physicist, as you heard Todd point out. I can tell you that no physicists, no engineers, can actually visualize joules or BTUs, or you can't visualize energy. Energy is not visualizable. I mean, the numbers get big, but money we understand. So think about it in these terms. Every $100 billion of cars, and cars, by the way, are one of the most important inventions of history in terms of freedom creation and economic productivity for the average person. That's why everybody in the world that doesn't have a car wants a car. The invention of the car was not intended to invent energy demand. It was invented to create mobility and freedom. And it created productivity in machineries, in farming, in the transportation of goods and services. But every $100 billion of cars that are put on the road and built will generate $20 billion of energy demand over the decade of use of the cars. That makes sense. Every $100 billion of aircraft generates about $30 billion of energy consumed over the decade of the aircraft. Every $100 billion of factories, chip fabs built, will generate about as much energy demand in dollar terms as aircraft do. And this is what gets to the current dislocations in our economy and all the both excitement and hype around data centers, every $100 billion in data centers, and this is pre-AI, generates $100 billion of energy consumption over a decade of operating the data centers. And as you add AI to the equation, as you infuse more of these data centers with AI, this number goes up by about a factor of 2 in terms of the energy consumed over a decade. That's why you're seeing these kinds of hyperbolic numbers coming in. So this is an interesting transformation. I've been writing about the relationship between energy and information for decades. It's been of interest to me because I began my career as a semiconductor process engineer in large-scale integration. I worked with the people who invented the future. I had a small hand in it. I mean, it was my first patents were in that area. But you could see at the dawn of the semiconductor age, this was when I began my career, that we were on track for something really remarkable and different. The goal in making chips faster and more powerful wasn't to consume more energy. The goal was to make each chip use less energy per logic operation. But that ended up resulting in them consuming more energy, which was predictable, I thought. But at the dawn of this modern computer era, 1995, one of the most popular books at that time, for those of you of a certain age, you'll remember when the internet started booming, Nicholas Negroponte, who was at MIT and started the Media Lab at MIT, wrote a book called Being Digital, did a terrific job forecasting much of what's happened in the ensuing 30 years. But in that book, in that idea, he framed something that has infected people's thinking incorrectly for all of those decades. And I just pulled a quote from the book. Atoms have mass. We build stuff with atoms, and materials need to be transported. Bits, the digital world, bits are weightless and virtual and allow for instant global communications. So that phrasing, the cyber world, the virtual world, bits are weightless, gave the impression that this was a free lunch, that you could do all this digital stuff without consuming lots of hardware and lots of materials and lots of energy. Fast forward exactly 30 years later, before the Senate in late May, I think it was early June, Sam Altman was testifying before the Senate, and it's a quote from something he said, and of course, as you know, he's the founder, he runs OpenAI. It's hard to overstate how important energy is to the AI future. The cost of AI will converge to the cost of energy. The abundance of AI will be limited by the abundance of energy. This is quite a journey, quite a transformation from virtual, weightless, free lunch land for the cyber future to no one in that world suspects that the cost of energy is a free lunch. To get to this transformation was quite remarkable. Let me show you in the very sort of hardware and BTU energy terms what he's talking about. So we've gone from a world thinking bits were free to the world of atoms and molecules needed to energize and house the bits. All bits live inside of machines that have to build and consume energy. So a single AI data center, this is a picture of Elon Musk inside of his XAI data center in Memphis. A single XAI data center, of which there are dozens like this being built right now, and dozens more being proposed. These are 1 gigawatt data centers, 1,000 megawatt data centers. It will consume 60 million cubic feet per day of natural gas. Just one of them. If you didn't know this, the Starship that SpaceX is building burns natural gas, LNG. It's the first spaceship to fly on natural gas, on LNG. It's the biggest rocket ship ever built by humanity. It's bigger than the Saturn V of the Apollo program. It consumes 50 million cubic feet of natural gas per launch. So far we've launched, I think, 7 Starships. One data center uses that much natural gas every day. That's a remarkable amount of energy by any standard. Let's think about, Todd talked about how the future is built in copper and steel, boots on the ground. So think about this, and we didn't communicate in advance. This is a perfect setup. I mean, think about this in concrete and steel terms. A single gigawatt data center uses more concrete and steel than it took to build the Empire State Building. And the energy costs of concrete and steel have not gone down. In fact, they're roughly the same as they were at the time the Empire State Building was built. Todd showed you a picture of the spending I'm updating that. The picture, the data that you have from the Wall Street Journal have changed since the Wall Street Journal published that. This is now where we are. The top 4 hyperscalers have committed now to a $325 billion a year spend in 2025. This is not a forecast about what they might spend in 5 years. So this rise in CapEx is astonishing by most people's standards. And the question you would ask yourself, Todd asked the question, is this a bubble? Is this sustainable? Is this a business model-based spend? Is this pure hype? Now, there's two classes of bubbles. One is the asset bubble in stock markets and equities. You all are familiar with the dot-com bust. And then there's the bubble in physical infrastructure. Did you build too many hotels, too many highways, too many power plants? That's a different kind of bubble. That's a physical asset bubble versus a perception and a bet on the future bubble, which is what equity markets are about. I'm not going to talk about equity markets, although we can in Q&A if you like. I'm going to talk about the physical infrastructure question and whether the spending tsunami is a bubble or it's going to keep going. There are some forecasts that we're going to rise to $1 trillion annual spend on AI and cloud build-out by the year 2032. $1 trillion a year. What's happening? Well, first of all, I just want you to know this is not new. This phenomena is not an overnight phenomena. This is U.S. Federal Reserve data of U.S. private sector spending in the 4 categories of where the private sector spends money: industrial equipment, transportation equipment, physical structures, and information infrastructure. You can see for all of the 21st century, from the year 2000 to date, that the top line, the red line, information infrastructure, is the biggest, except briefly in 2008 to date, and it's rising faster than any other class of CapEx, capital spending by private markets. All money spent in information infrastructure necessarily requires capital that consumes energy to build the equipment and consumes energy when it operates, as you saw from my early slide. And it consumes more energy than the transportation equipment. So if you just did this simplistically and looked at the transportation equipment spending, remember the picture I showed you about cars and trucks are similar to cars and airplanes, and you've got more spending in information infrastructure and have here for decades, for 2 decades of the century, than you have in transportation equipment. That should have an energy consequence. That energy consequence has been hidden for almost 15 years by the one-shot interregnum where we had massive improvements in the electricity efficiency of sort of the 4 classes of primary electricity demand: lighting, HVAC, refrigeration, and of course, the home aspect of air conditioning, not the industrial class. And all those improvements were one-time improvements. They happened in the early 21st century, and we're done. So why are the hyperscalers spending hundreds of billions of dollars a year on cloud infrastructure? It's because of this trend. This is the spending by markets on cloud services. You know what a cloud service is because you all use them. When you use Google Map or Google Search, when you use any app, all the apps are run in the cloud. When you use anything to do vacation searches, what all of your questions about healthcare, everything is moving and migrating into the cloud. The cloud is a utility function for information, in the simplest terms. It's like the same thing as the utility function for electric power moved into utility structure in an economic and physical model. That's what the information infrastructure has done. The market is buying services from that collection of businesses that provide cloud services. And many of the cloud services businesses, by the way, are also cloud infrastructure builders, but most of them are not. Most cloud services businesses rent the infrastructure from the physical infrastructure builders, Amazon and Microsoft. But just look at the scale. If you can't read the y-axis, this is in thousands of billions of dollars. The world is already spending almost $1 trillion a year on cloud services, and will spend $2 trillion a year on cloud services in the next 4 years. Annual spending on a service from a physical infrastructure. So in that context, the spending $200 to $300 billion a year of CapEx to expand a system that is moving towards spending $2 trillion a year on cloud services. This is the business model The business model is not build it and they will come. The business model is the market is demanding these things, and so the providers are creating the services, which requires the infrastructure. When it comes to AI, though, the question in your mind will be, it has to be, it's in my mind, I began thinking about this when I was writing my book, and some of the investments that we've made in the small fund that I'm part of, is what are we using AI for? What is the market using it for? Well, some of you may have experience with using AI for fun or for specific business purposes. Some of you are probably using AI and you don't know you're using it because a lot of it's in the background. But if AI, to put it sort of facetiously and simplistically, if the primary purpose of AI is to make deep fakes, make fun of politicians, which is honestly a really good use of AI, I think. There's nothing more fun than watching really realistic videos of politicians doing embarrassing things. It's the high great purpose of entertainment for computing. But deep fakes have bad things associated with them because of spoofing, and is that video real that you're seeing on X, or is it spoofed? There's a lot of that going on. If that's the only use for it, is to make a better chat bot, which is very useful, by the way, because I'm sure all of you have had the same experience that I have. I very rarely encounter a computer chat bot that I don't want to jump down through my cell phone and wring its virtual neck to stop it, to get me a human being. So getting a good chat bot would be a nice product or service. But when you if you want to look at the future, you have to look at, it's one metric for this, to guess what the future is going to be for anything, but certainly for AI, but for anything, you might look as the first order where the patents are being filed. Because patent filing tells you something about innovation, and when people file patents, it takes money, it takes time, it's a pretty high hurdle. And if you look where patents are being filed, you're looking at what people are going to do in the near future with something that was invented in the near past, as opposed to guessing. So if you look at patent filings in AI, this is the total cumulative global patents filed. By the way, most of them are in the United States, more than half. But if you look at the patents filings, you can see they've blown up in the last decade. So this is from 2013 to 2023. So just a few thousands, up to now we're at over pushing 300,000 patents being filed annually in the AI domains. But if you break them down by category, the bottom category is sort of personal devices, personal computing, making it easier to use your smartphone, which is a big business. But over half of them are in what you would call productivity-driving domains. Not in deep fakes, not in making your phone more fun to use or sports more interesting to watch, but in productivity-driving domains. That's where the patents are being filed. That is a leading indicator of what AI is going to be used for and is already being used for. And why does productivity matter? Well, remember that slide I showed you from 1820 to 1920 to 2020. Productivity matters because it's what drives wealth. It's what drives growth. Productivity, all of you know, but I'll redefine it and say it again, is getting more output with fewer inputs. Less labor, less material, less energy, more output. That is by definition what productivity is. That's what drives wealth because it means the pie expands, that old adage. US productivity growth since World War II, this is Federal Reserve data, for each sort of period of growth that the Fed maps out, averaged 2.2% per year, the productivity growth. The last 15 years, we've been averaging productivity growth of just over 1% a year. The great hope for AI is that it takes the United States back to the 20th century's long-run average of productivity growth of 2.2%. Doesn't sound like a big change, but that's why AI is being pursued. In fact, I would say it differently. AI has no chance of having significant penetration in the market or the economy unless the market decides, people, businesses, that it's delivering something useful. And the principal thing that it has to deliver that's useful is saving something, saving my time, saving fuel, saving materials. That's why it will be used, and that's why it's being used. So that's the promise. I think, this is why I wrote my book, we are going to rebound at least back to the average productivity growth of the 20th century of 2.2%, instead of the CBO's forecast of 1.4%. What would that mean in the basic, simple terms? What it would mean is that over the next decade, the US economy would add $10 trillion more cumulative wealth than it would otherwise have added for the growth now forecast. So over the next decade, if we read down to the long-run average, we will actually have 10 trillion more of cumulative wealth added to the US economy if AI delivers as promised. $10 trillion is a lot of money in a decade. You solve a lot of problems in society, not all of them, when you have a lot of extra wealth to go around. People fight less over sharing the wealth. We can deal with the deficit with this kind of growth. We can expand healthcare, we can fund research, and we can have more fun, frankly. But also, increased wealth increases energy demand itself. Never mind the data centers using energy. This is the single most important feature of AI, not that it uses electricity to run the machines, but that it induces wealth creation. And wealth creation always induces energy consumption. Adding $10 trillion of net new additional capital to the US economy in the next decade will require supplying, in oil terms, 5 billion barrels more oil equivalent energy to the US economy supply than would otherwise be consumed. That's a very big number. So bring it back to where you're seeing requests for load that were unprecedented, that you're not alone. It's, about 10 or 12 states are seeing the same thing. Excuse me. So as you know, the FERC has its own forecast to answer the question, how much more should we expect? This is the last FERC forecast, and you can see that their 2029 forecast for the net addition to US power plant demand. Back in 2022, they thought we need 23 gigawatts more. In 23, they thought we need 39 gigawatts more. Last year, their most recent forecast, they think that the United States will need between 67 and 128 gigawatts more net new supply by the year 2029. That's a lot of gigawatts. I mean, as you all know, a gigawatt's a nuclear plant. That's a lot of power demand. This has sort of shocked everybody in the electricity business. It shocked Washington, it shocked the world. It is shocking. I mean, if you think about it in facility-specific terms, there's never been a physical infrastructure class this big, this fast in modern history, in power terms. The biggest skyscraper in the world, the Burj in the Middle East, that skyscraper is a 40-megawatt building. We're not building hundreds of those. We're building a few in the world. A big electric steel mill is 100 megawatt per steel mill. We're not building hundreds of those. We're building maybe another one. The TSMC fab being built in Phoenix, one of the biggest semiconductor fabs in the world, emulating the fabs that they have in Taiwan. That's a 200 megawatt building. We're building a few of those. The Baytown refinery for Exxon, this is a really big, one of the top 5 biggest refineries in the country. It's a 500 megawatt. We're not building any of those. The Cheniere LNG Corpus LNG export facility, that's a big kahuna, 700 megawatts to compress gas and cool it. One Stargate data center, the famous one outside Abilene, of which dozens are being proposed, it's 1 to 5 gigawatts per data center. Certainly the 500 megawatt to the 1 gigawatt class data centers are being proposed at a sort of a torrid rate. This is really quite remarkable. So the question that's being asked is, not only is it real, I think it's real, whether it's 70 gigawatts or 140 gigawatts, 70 is a big number to add to the grid demand in just the next 5 years. So whichever it is, it's a big number. Can you supply the power? This is a global number, the guess from IEA, and of course you can see they did a graph of all the studies, the different ranges. What you'll notice is there's a big range between studies forecasting global data center demand. And the range is really large. It's a 400% difference between the lowest and the highest. But the key point is it's all going up. The low one is probably too low, the high one might be too high. There's lots of banks and analysts trying to guess what the doubling rate is for data center capacity demand. The highest one is a doubling in 3 years. The slowest one is the IEA's, which is a doubling in 10 years. I would just put it to you that a doubling of any infrastructure's electric demand, of course, is consequential. And it's not widely and evenly distributed. It's concentrated in a half dozen states. About 10 years ago, I put this forecast into play, and it was generated, by the way, as a consequence of work I did 10 years prior to that with Basin Electric, which was to answer the question back then, how much electricity demand is coming from the internet and the cloud and data centers. I made a forecast then that turned out to be pretty accurate, both on EV electric demand, cloud electric demand, and lighting demand globally and in the United States. One takeaway from this, by the way, with respect to planning for electric demand, EVs are, even if we achieve the goals that are no longer achievable in terms of global electric demand, chump change compared to the global electric demand from the cloud. Here's a key fact for you when it comes to electric demand, though, from data centers and the cloud. If you are going to have a gigawatt of load, you obviously need it when you need it, which is when I finish building the building, I've spent a lot of money, I want the power available. So that velocity issue is incredibly important. I will tell you that's the single most important issue for data centers now, is can I get the power when I finish building the facility? Remember, you're building 100, 200, 300, 500 megawatts of demand in 18 months to 24 months. We'll get to how fast you can build supply, but that's the demand vector. What matters most is velocity, not the price of the electrons. What matters most to consumers is reliability and the price of electrons. What matters most to data centers is reliability. Reliability and then reliability. That it's reliably there when I finish my data center, and when I'm running my data center, it's available 24/7. This is a data series that shows you the impact of degrading reliability, availability, versus the impact of higher price. The x-axis takes electricity from 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour up to 20 cents. It's a 10x increase in electricity. The y-axis is a decrease in utilization or an increase in unreliability. You see the curves don't go up much as you increase price, but the range in which you have negative impacts goes up dramatically as you decrease reliability. Or put in simplest terms, reliability in economic terms is worth 5 times as much to a data center as the cost of electricity. They're 5 times more sensitive to unreliable power than they are to high-priced power. So what would you do? If you were a data center operator, or if you're a provider, like you all, and somebody comes to you and says they need a gigawatt, and it has to be 24/7 a gigawatt, it has to be dispatchable, reliable, and I need it soon, where can you get a gigawatt of 24/7 power? Well, you all know the answer to this. You could build 1 nuclear plant. You could build 1 coal plant. The question here that matters is, how long does it take you to build it, obviously? Remember, these data centers are now being built. It's not theoretical. They've broken ground in Louisiana. They've broken ground in Homer City, Pennsylvania. They're breaking ground all over the country, building demand that when first silicon is lit in 18 months, they'll need 150 megawatts. Second phase will be 250 megawatts in another 6 months. Third phase in 6 more months will be 400 megawatts. 6 more months, it'll be 500 megawatts. That's that kind of timeline. Or you could build a power plant with 3 to 10 natural gas turbines. Or you could build 100 big Cat diesel gensets chain them together, or 200 of them. If they're the smaller, the 2 megawatt Cat diesel gensets, or the 2.5 megawatts. Or you could build 1,000 wind turbines, and to make them dispatchable using future pricing for batteries that's theoretical, you'd have to also build $10 billion of batteries per gigawatt of wind turbines. The economics there is interesting. It doesn't cost $10 billion to build a nuclear plant, unless you get profoundly unlucky. It doesn't cost anywhere near $10 billion to build a gigawatt of gas turbines. So you can see the economics here. What's going to matter the most is velocity. All those are roughly equally reliable, roughly speaking. Can you get them built? The velocity of getting them built will depend on where you are. If you get lucky and you buy and refurbish a non-decommissioned nuke, you can get that gigawatt nuke up maybe in 3 or 4 years, but not in a year to 18 months. I'll tell you what's happening right now is, of course, the order book for gas turbines, big frame turbines that you all have, availability now is pushed out to 2028, 29, some of them 2030. The 3 big vendors are fully booked, and they're fully booked out for 5 or 6 years. What you'll do, and what's happening is you'll use smaller combustion turbines and chain them, and diesel engines, natural gas fueled diesel engines. 3 days ago, a company called Joule did a joint venture with Caterpillar to build a 5 gigawatt facility site in Utah using Cat diesel engines. Think about that. Now, why would you use diesel engines? Because we can build them quickly. The idea that we can't build enough power plant capacity fast enough is the lie of that lack of belief is illustrated by one fact. We already know how to build gigawatts of capacity annually because we're already doing it. Engines in Class 8 trucks, those big diesel engines, are high reliability, long life engines. Extremely reliable, run 24/7, as you know. They're about a half megawatt each. So it's in electrical terms is what they are. They're half megawatt engines. The United States builds and puts on the road 150 gigawatts of diesel engines a year right now. 150 gigawatts a year. So the idea that we can't, as a country, supply 50 to 100 gigawatts of additional power generating capacity over the next 5 years, of course, it's a silly, of course we can. It's not a question, can we do it, do we want to do it? And of course, wanting to do it will mean we're going to be doing what we're already doing, which is many of these data centers, when they know that they'd like to build, well, they might want to refurbish a coal plant, for example, which is already happening. They might want to cancel the cancellation of a coal plant and maybe even secretly expand that coal plant. Knowing that that will take 3 to 4 years, what would you do if you need 500 megawatts in the meantime? Well, you could park 500 megawatts of diesel engines on that site and burn natural gas in the interim and convert over to coal or nukes or whatever you want to build wind turbines, you go, girl, build them at your expense to the point of your business model. This is what, all these will happen. But what will happen first and most are the diesel engines, because the gas turbines are being maxed out. They will come next. Then we'll have coal plants. We'll have nuclear plants. And there'll be more wind and solar in some parts of the country. But what none of this will lead to is a, quote, energy transition. When I spoke to you all last 7 years ago, I spent most of my time trying to convince you. If you may remember, the title of my presentation was the Energy Transition Delusion. I said that then, and I'll say it again, it's a delusionary framing because there isn't an energy transition. There isn't one underway. There's never been an energy transition. There's never going to be an energy transition. By never, I mean, call it a century. This is the global per capita use of hydrocarbons and the graph on your left. You can see there's, after 20 years since the year 2000, and $20 trillion of spending by Europe and the United States to avoid using hydrocarbons, this is the outcome. I mean, we use more coal than we did 20 years ago. We use more gas globally, and roughly the same amount of oil per capita, and in absolute terms, more oil. And as I illustrated last time, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it this time, except to give you one factoid that I didn't give you last time. The green machines, so-called wind turbines, solar arrays, batteries at grid scale, and for cars, all require new classes of harder-to-get minerals, obviously, right? Cobalt, manganese, and lithium, and nickels, much more nickel. Those have very poor rock-to-minerals ratios. They're low ore-grade materials. They take a lot of mining. We aren't mining enough to do the so-called transition anyway, even if we wanted to try. The world today, right now, to get all the class of minerals we need for everything in society, including especially copper, the world mines about 7,000 Great Pyramids worth of rock a year to get the minerals we need today. To get the minerals we would need for an energy transition, we'd have to mine 50,000 Great Pyramids of rock a year to get to those minerals. You don't have to be a forecaster. It's not going to happen, and it's not happening. So the idea that there's a transition there is just silly on the basis of just the physical velocity of the time it takes to expand global mining. And of course, just to briefly address what's in most people's heads, the hand-waving that's been going on for 2 decades about the exponential change, the Moore's law in clean tech compared to other forms of energy, all this kind of silly talk is silly talk. Moore's law is the exponential rate of change in computing. Moore's law means that things that we now see where the power of your smartphone versus the power of an IBM mainframe in 1980. Your smartphone has 10,000 IBM mainframes of 1980 worth of compute capability, and obviously instead of the mainframe then was 20 kilowatts, your phone is measured in watts. That kind of progress only happens in information, not in energy. Moore's law and energy for batteries would look like that red line. The blue line is the actual trends in lithium battery efficacy, that is, the amount of energy per pound of battery. It tripled in the early deployment of large-scale lithium batteries and is saturated because that's what the physics of energy dictates. If energy machines followed a Moore's law to illustrate how silly that idea is, because you'll keep hearing the language of exponential change and clean tech is coming, it's gotten exponentially cheaper. All these things are misuse and silly use of trends from information being bolted on to the physical world of energy and atoms. If that could follow that pattern, by the way, if there was a Moore's law for batteries, a battery would, in a few decades, cost 3 cents, and one battery, the size of a paperback book, would fly a 787. That happens in, Iron Man comic book stuff. Moore's law for solar power would mean a postage stamp solar array would power a skyscraper. It's just not going to happen in the physics of our universe. So what's happened is that the silly Moore's law, PowerPoint babbling about energy transition has been, largely pushed to the background. There's still a lot of push for that idea, but what a lot of that community is doing is now reattach its enthusiasm to fission, which is really good, by the way. Now everybody's excited about nuclear power, which is great. As a point of personal confession, I spent the week of the accident at 3 Mile Island as a young man when I first came to the United States, working in the nuclear industry. And then I spent a decade defending the virtues of nuclear energy, obviously unsuccessfully, because we largely abandoned the nuclear enterprise until recently. I think it's spectacular that so much tech money is being plowed into nuclear energy. We will get new generations of reactors. But the love of small reactors is exciting but misplaced in terms of anything relevant for the near future. None of them exist that you can buy. If you want to build a nuclear plant, you'll build what we know how to build, which are these big 1,000 megawatt or so-called smaller 600 megawatt, but really big power plants. We know how to build them. We can build them quickly if we wanted to. We have the engineering history. But we'll also design and build lots of small reactors. The picture on your left is a photograph of an actual small reactor built by GE, 35 megawatts. 1956, it was a real reactor. It was designed to make a nuclear-powered airplane. Air Force funded this program. I think they spent close to $2 billion. And this is the reactor being installed in a was it a Convair? So that program was killed by President Kennedy because it was never going to fly, no pun intended. The shielding made the aircraft so heavy that it could get off the ground, but it couldn't carry people or bombs or anything else. So, but we can do better today, probably. We'll make small reactors. But if you want to think about what the future of nuclear power will look like, it's probably going to look a lot like the present for aviation platforms. I mean, we can make very big airplanes. We can make small airplanes. But where is the economic utility function epicenter lie for commercial aircraft? The 787 and A320s. This is a graph that you see of the actual physical number distribution of aircraft by size in the world. 3/4 of all aircraft are essentially 737s, A320 size. And then we have small ones and big ones that occupy the last quarter. Nuclear power is going to look just like that. We're going to have thousands of nuclear power plants that are small, but the majority of nuclear power plants will be big in the future. But all this power demand, it has to be in your head, because you hear it and read it, is that the way we're going to solve this problem, and it's viewed as a problem. I don't see it as a problem, by the way, as you can probably guess. The power demand is an opportunity for the power providers. It's an opportunity for the economy, because the reason the power is being demanded is because of economic demand, economic growth. But for those who have this developed decades worth of obsession to avoid energy consumption, the first thing they'll say is, don't worry, the efficiency is going to solve the problem. We're going to make computers more efficient. AI has to be more energy efficient. AI is a hog, and we're told, you'll see clickbait headlines, the latest chips are 30 times more energy efficient than the previous AI chip. This is true. Efficiency is getting better. Efficiency creates demand. Efficiency doesn't kill demand. Efficiency creates demand in the engineering world. An easy example would be aviation. This is the graph of global air traffic, total passengers and billions of passengers. And in 1958, we began to put jet engines on airframes, which in aviation terms is equivalent of putting AI in data centers, by the way. The infrastructure for aviation was already big in 1958, been around for 30 years. Airports, lots of passengers, lots of flights, big industry, and it, no pun intended, took off from there when we added the accelerant of the greater efficiency, higher altitude, greater safety, higher reliability of commercial turbines. The efficiency of flying measured in the proper way, that is energy used per passenger mile, is 500% better than from 1958. And 300% better, and the total amount of fuel used in aviation went up 500%. If you want to think about, instead of artificial intelligence, think of it in terms of artificial illumination. We're jaundiced by lighting, and of course most of the development of rural electrification began, as you all know, a century ago for lighting and motors. That's why we began it. Lighting was magical. When artificial illumination was invented, it changed the world. It was considered a really big deal. It was called artificial illumination for a reason, not because we artificially created something that was really valuable. Illumination efficiency has improved hundreds of billions of fold over a century. The consumption of lumens also went up millions of fold, because as you made artificial illumination more energy efficient, we consumed more illumination more rapidly than the efficiency gains. This is a very old story, especially in computing. If you think about compute efficiency, this is a similar graph to the illumination efficiency. The y-axis is a logarithmic curve, so every increment is a 10-fold increase. The orange shaded area is a forecast. This is a forecast from TSMC, and they know what they're talking about because they only forecast what they've already designed. Compute basic transistor density is still improving at 170% every 2 years. Compute efficiency is still getting better at 300% every 2 years, and will keep getting better at 300% every 2 years for the next decade plus. Even AI efficiency, this is AI chips only. This is a graph of just AI chips in what's called flops per watt, because that's just the other framing that the computer scientists like to use. It's getting better at about 300% every 2 years as well, and has been since the dawn of what we would call the modern AI era, which is only a decade old. And the power per AI chip is not going down, it's going up. Each chip goes up more slowly, but remember, if the efficiency is getting better at 300% every 2 years, that means its cost to operate is declining at 300% per flop every 2 years. So even if the power per chip is rising, which it is, at 300% per decade, so a single chip now uses a kilowatt, and there are AI chips in the market now, one chip, which is the size of a pizza, that consumes 25 kilowatts. One chip. And we'll put thousands of those into data centers. That's the trend that we're in. In fact, the trend that we're in, if we're going to tell you why I think it's a permanent trend and not a bubble. Again, I'm saying this is not talking about the equities bubble, whether NVIDIA stock is worth what it is. It may be, or whether Amazon stock is worth what it is. These are related phenomenology, but they're not exactly the same thing. But if you think about the physical infrastructure drivers, this is the trend that you would want to understand, because it tells you something fundamental about what the economy wants. Remember, the first rule of forecasting is markets want something that's important to get cheaper. If they get something that's important, cheaper, and valuable, they'll use more of it. So if you measure computing in this framing, computations per second, per dollar, constant dollar, how much do you buy when you buy a computer or you rent service in a cloud, just whatever, doesn't matter if you buy or rent, computations per second per dollar. In the first computer era of electronic computer, not electromechanical, that metric was getting better by 16-fold a decade. So every decade, roughly 2,000% more value per constant dollar. That's why the computer era took off from the post-World War II era into the year 2000. In the cloud era, the combination of AI and the utility function of the cloud, the rate of economic improvement is running at 1,000-fold per decade. You're getting 1,000-fold more value for the same dollar for every decade that passes. This is a profound accelerant. Remember, markets buy more of something that gets cheap fast. This is getting cheap very fast. The only comparable period of a 1,000-fold decline or a 1,000-fold improvement in economic efficiency was in the 20th century in transportation. If you use a similar metric as computations per second per dollar, constant dollar, and think about transportation in feet per hour per constant dollar, moving goods or people, how much you pay in feet per hour per dollar. The reason you fly instead of take a ship is because the feet per hour is better, and if the feet per hour per dollar is comparable, you'll do it, right? So over the 20th century, from 1900 to 2000, there was a 1,000-fold improvement in that metric. That explains the entire economic expansion by itself in the 20th century, to improve by 1,000-fold the economic efficacy of transportation. The biggest improvement in the economic efficacy of transportation in human history, 1,000-fold improvement in 1 century. We're getting that improvement in computational rents in every decade now. That tells you there's going to be a lot of demand. And the demand won't peak. Unlike cars, where you do get peak demand, all of us have a very limited tolerance for how much time we really want to spend in a car. You can measure it across all cultures and all societies. You get the peak time in a car. So car vehicle miles only rise with rising wealth for people getting cars in poor countries or rising population in wealthy countries. So we've reached peak vehicle miles in America, basically. And it'll only increase if there's more people. There's more cars than there are citizens in the country. So the only way there's more vehicle miles is that there's more people. Legal or illegal doesn't matter in terms of the numbers. More people will get more, that's it. But here's an interesting energy factoid for you. 100 miles of superhighway costs about the same as a gigawatt data center. And they have about the same power demand. A peak load on a highway, there's 1 gigawatt of engines on that load using energy. And it costs about $2 billion to build that stretch of highway. So that's the difference between the cars and the data center is you get peak load episodically. The data centers, you get a peak load constantly. So how much more demand is there for the key metric in data centers? This is back to sort of asking and answering the macro question. Is it a bubble? Is there a limit to demand? Is it like vehicle miles or air miles? You know, people have never flown, want to fly, but people who fly a lot don't want to fly. It's a very standard metric, if you like. This is true for all physical products. It's not true for information. So this is a map of the total amount of data on the information ecosystem of the world measured in zettabytes. And we entered the zettabyte era about 10 years ago. It's not kilobytes, it's not, gigabytes, not terabytes. These are really big numbers, crazy big numbers. We're moving to the yottabyte era. Each byte uses energy, every byte uses energy. It's not free, it's not virtual. And we move into the yottabyte era to give you a sense of the magnitude of demand this has for energy. I'll explain what a yotta prefix means, because most of you, like most people, this is not an insult. You probably don't know what a yotta is or a zetta. I mean, it's a big number. A zettabyte is 10 to the 21. A yotta is 10 to the 23. I mean, that's a lot of bytes. Give you an idea what this means. A dollar bill, if you stack dollar bills up, if you had a stack of dollar bills that was a 1 yotta stack, it would go from the Earth to the sun, which is 93 million miles away, and back 700 million times. It's a big number. So if each little byte doesn't use much energy, okay, that's going to use a lot of energy. It's a big number. And we're going to the yottabyte era because we're going to move from regular telephony and smartphones with flat screens. Holography is coming. Holography is a data hog. We're going to move into eras where your personal information will generate. This is a forecast for you, but this is a far future forecast. It's certainly more than a decade away. You'll have a personal digital twin. What does that mean? In the cloud somewhere will be all of your biological information in real time in a virtual model of you, your particular biological capabilities, your particular proclivities, your diets, your habits, your health records. And it can and will do in silico modeling of what kind of drugs might work best for you. This is no longer a theoretical idea. It's a lot of this. The graph is a graph of research papers focused on virtual digital twins, human digital twins, where the idea is not science fiction twin, it's not a person, it's a model of you, your biology, in a way that helps physicians make judgments. Would you want one of those? So if I said to somebody in 1975, would you want to have a computer in your pocket? A lot of people, except for engineering dweebs, would look at you blankly like you came from another planet. You all have computers in your pocket more powerful than anything that existed on Earth then. This will happen. This is happening. This is a forecast based on something that's already underway, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. But in terms of the sustainability of the macro trend for the infrastructure, that's what's driving it. So let me wrap up with sort of a picture really quickly of the adoption rate of AI, because it also tells you something about whether it's real or a bubble. This is data from May of this year. If you measure the adoption rate of the PC from the first, what we would consider a commercially viable, useful PC, 1984, years since they were viable, that's the x-axis. And the y-axis is the adoption rate of our US economy. By year 4, the adoption rate was 20% for PCs. By year 4, the adoption rate for the internet was already at 40%. And it's because the internet used PCs that were already there. By year 2, since ChatGPT came on the market, we've matched the adoption rate of the internet. So it's moving twice as fast as the adoption rate of the internet. And this is not, again, a subsidized adoption rate. This is no government program making this happen. This is market consumption. What's really interesting about the adoption rate is who's adopting AI. And now I'm not talking about generating, spoof videos, but about productivity-driven utility function AI tools, either in cloud or in device. This is showing you the 1984 computer adoption rate, x-axis. Y-axis is the AI adoption rate in 2024. The dotted line would mean the adoption rates were the same. So on the right side, slower adoption rate. Interestingly, finance and business services are adopting AI slower than they adopted computers. What's interesting on the left side is that the extraction industry and agricultural sectors and construction are adopting AI faster than they adopted computing. The reason for this is maybe put in the simplest framing. AI makes a lot of computing useful, finally. Semantically addressable. Answers come back in semantically useful ways. And they're not computations, they're inferences, and they're suggestions. That's what AI essentially does. Very fast adoption rate. So will the adoption of AI and the driving of productivity mean there's a jobs apocalypse? Because to the point that Todd pointed out, that there are trade-offs in everything. This is what economics 101 is. It's life is about. Everything is a trade-off. Are we going to see a jobs apocalypse because AI drives productivity, which means it can and will destroy certain classes of jobs while it creates others? We've been doing this, humans, for about 2,000 years. In the modern era, we've been doing it for 200 years. Human beings invent machines designed to eliminate jobs. It's the purpose of it. You want productivity, you have to reduce the number of people doing the thing. Or you want to eliminate the people entirely doing that thing so they can do something else. But does that result in destruction of all jobs or the majority of jobs? You should have this in your head. You can look this up on the magic Google machine. It's easy to find. Look at the productivity growth rate for industrial technologies from 1900 to 1930, a 20, 30-year period. So far, AI has not matched any of those productivity gains. That's why we had that big productivity boom then. That's the inverse of it. The decline in number of jobs per ton of steel from 1910 to 1925 was 400%. 400% improvement in productivity, which meant a fourfold reduction in labor hours per ton of steel. That was a booming productivity time. Did it kill jobs? All of this graph here on your right is an illustration, a map, for simplified, of the unemployment rate of the United States since 1890, when we have useful data. What you can see is that we have cycles of high unemployment, mostly driven by government stupidity and bad decisions by politicians. Meanwhile, the unemployment rate is sort of normalized at around 5%, or put differently, 95% of the US population has been employed, that wants to be employed, for 200 years, as the productivity of the economy has soared and income has soared. This is a movie we've seen before. This is the movie that will repeat. This is what's going to happen. And what will drive it, of course, is the new infrastructure that we have, which is the cloud infrastructure, which will be powered and fueled by the electrons that Todd pointed out. And odds are high, a lot of it will be in your service territory, because the most likely place where most of these data centers are being built is in rural America. So I'll end with this last observation. It's kind of, there's a delicious irony here. Think about this. The rural electrification for artificial illumination and motors and pumps for irrigation, but really was about, if you look back at the language at the time, it was about lighting up rural America. Urban America got lit up quickly. Rural America didn't. So the rural electrification lit up the rural areas because we needed the lighting for all the reasons that you know and why. Century and change later, where is artificial intelligence going to build the engines that will light up our economy? Rural America. The dominant number of sites are all in rural America, especially in your service territories and your brothers and cousins and sisters in the other co-ops around the country. I see it all over Texas, all over Georgia. I think it's an exciting opportunity. I think you're approaching it the right way. Let others take the capital risk. They can take the risk. The Mag 7 have $600 billion of free cash on their balance sheets. You don't have to give them any incentives in money. It offends me that we're giving them cash incentives. What we can give them is the incentive to cooperate with us. They can take the capital risk, but you all know how to run power plants and build them. They don't want to do that. They'll only do it if they're forced to. So they would rather work with companies, businesses like yours, and then we'll energize the 21st century. And we will have, as the subtitle of my book says, and I'm pitching my book again, you can tell, I think we're facing a roaring 2020s of a real economic boom, as long as we, as I said at the start, keep the politics from destroying us, which we have a habit in America of getting the politics right eventually. So I think you're at the tip of the spear in your service territory and in your business, and I wish you good fortune in taking advantage of it. Thank you. Do we have a few minutes you want?
Yes.
If there's some questions, do we have a few minutes, or it's possible you have some objections?
We have 3 microphones in the audience. If you could please roll to or head over to those microphones if you have a question. That way everybody can hear, and then the people online can also hear your question. Thank you.
Mr. Mills, I wanted to first of all thank you for your share today, as well as I think your testimony in front of the House Subcommittee this April. Outstanding stuff. And you showed some things about coal production globally. With the Chinese having announced their conviction of, 94 gigawatts, I think, in terms of advancing their production, I think is provided in a news article of February of this year in Carbon Brief. Are you saying that the appetite beyond China could be here in the U.S. and that we could get some things moving and opening coal plants?
The short answer is yes, I do. And I'll go on record. I've not published something like this, but I plan to shortly, because I know it would make some green heads explode, to use that phrase. We can expect to see a net new coal plant designed and built to power a data center in the United States. We've effectively already done that. So the cancellation of cancellations of coal plants in the United States was entirely driven by the surprise of the arrival of demand growth in the electric sector, which was driven primarily by data centers, not exclusively. So we've already seen data centers keep coal plants alive. I think you'll see refurbishments and expansions and life extensions, but I also think you'll see in certain geographies a net new build. And I think you'll also see, for example, in some geographies, massive solar arrays put up with gigawatt-hour scale batteries as well, because in certain geographies, that will be the fastest and easiest path to get something built. And none of this will be driven by politics in the sense of the choice of power plants. It will be driven by economics, geography, and velocity. That's why I think we'll see a coal plant built. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you again for your service to our country and that phenomenal presentation. Yeah, I guess three things. Just kind of get your, feel free to just, your thoughts on these. The price per watt hour of batteries coming down below 10 cents a watt hour. I think you've seen, some things around 5 cents a watt hour for some of this LFP, lithium iron phosphate. Thoughts on that? Thoughts on humanoid robots? And there's at least one or two companies plan to scale those, scale production lines in the tens of thousands next year. And then autonomous transport, as you see Waymo, Tesla, and Zoox start to scale up their fleets, any impact from that?
Well, so batteries, robots, and autonomy, right?
Yeah, you're a smart guy. Just wanted to draw more out. I mean, I know you get deep thoughts on all these subjects. So just
I'll give you the short answer, because you could one could do. In fact, I have some extra slides, which I'll show you a couple real quickly. So first of all, the batteries are definitely cheaper. The problem the battery industry has now in terms of forecasting is that we're no longer on the exponential curve. We're now on the Wright's law curve, and that means 2% per year maximum change in the cost efficacy. So from a fundamental energy storage perspective, if you're looking at macro storage to deal with Dunkelflauts, long-term outages, batteries at today's or future prices are crazy expensive. Crazy expensive. You can't run a grid on using batteries for arbitrage for a day or two or even a week of outages. We're talking trillions of dollars of batteries at low theoretical price. The other problem batteries have is that between 70 and 80% of the cost of grid scale batteries now is associated with the bill of materials, the minerals going into it. So battery future prices are now totally dominated by mining. So if you want to guess what your battery is going to cost when you order it, because most of the grid scale guys are going to have a take or pay clause now, because they don't know what the price of copper is going to be, or nickel or manganese or phosphate. It doesn't matter what kind of battery. And it's dominated by copper, of course. So we have a 700% spread on future copper prices right now. I'm guessing it. If copper prices go up 700%, and they could if the demand is there, that'll increase the cost of the battery, every battery, by about 30 or 40%. It's a crazy problem. So there'll be more batteries, but they're going to be kept on the margin at the macro level. There'll be significant micro. Robot. I mean, I'm very bullish on robots. So there's, I should have ended with this slide. I mean, if you're trying to guess the next big inflection, you have autonomous air travel, autonomous trucks. That's the Joby aircraft, and anthropomorphic robots. These are no longer theoretical products. There's 50 companies making anthropomorphic robots. There's 100 companies making air taxis. Of those, dozens will succeed. They're energy-using machines to make them. They're energy-using machines to operate them. So all of that's coming. All of it's energy-intensive. All of it's productive. But we know it's coming because it's happened. But the cycle time to when there's significant commercial penetration, as I write in my book, is also predictable. Every cycle for 200 years follows the same pattern. And there are no exceptions, in fact. From the inception of the idea of a commercial possibility, like the invention of lithium chemistry in 1975, to the first commercial battery was 20 years. And to the first commercial battery of cost that you could get commercial insertion, which was the Tesla S, was 20 more years. That was true for the computer, for the telephone, for the telegraph, for the radio, for the television. I mean, everything of significant scale, not the clickbait stuff that we have accelerating change. So none of that's accelerated. So these things are 2 decades out from any kind of significant relevance, but they're going to happen, which gets to my bigger point about the sustainability. What was the third one you?
Autonomous transport.
Oh,
you kind of alluded to that.
Yeah,
a little bit.
autonomy on the ground is hard. It's harder than people think. In the air, it's much easier, which is why the first air taxis will have a pilot, but we'll get to those being autonomous relatively quickly, because it's a much easier, the fewer degrees of freedom, and latencies are better in the air, weirdly, as you know.
Yeah. I think Archer Aviation actually just, they're one of the leaders in that.
Yeah,
And they
Archer's
recently
great.
$800 million to go ahead and
Yeah.
start investing in AI for, autonomous,
And if you get air taxis, so their cost for the trip is equal to Uber Black, which is technically possible, or say it's 50% premium to Uber Black for those who use the premium service, then that will take off, and because it's time value of people's lives, and of course all air travel consumes more energy per route mile than ground travel because of the inconvenience of gravity. So you're going to increase energy use. Autonomy will increase energy use, not because it's not true that autonomous cars are more efficiently operated than humans in high density situations. It's because of what ultimately it means. It means for all intercity travel that's sub 300 miles, people will stop flying 400 miles and take an autonomous car and work and sleep. And so when you model that, you end up with this massive increase in road miles as you bring autonomy in, not a decrease in road miles.
right.
So, but again, that's
30% more
that's a
road
decade.
mileage per year.
Yeah.
They're estimating autonomous could increase road mileage per year 30%.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter whether the road miles are battery or gasoline. In the physics of the energy, it's immaterial. It'll just be dictated by the economics of which is cheaper, ultimately. Yeah. But robots are interesting. They sound science fiction-y and silly, except they're now real, and anthropomorphic robots can work where we work, and there's a data series that I have in another slide where we can look at the obvious. The working age population is declining relative to the older population, and if you need more people doing more construction trades, I want to upskill those people and have the robots do the drudgery and the dirty and the dangerous work, and we're on the cusp of making that possible. It's still difficult, but you could see the shape of it. You see it in warehouses already. Last year we shipped 1 million autonomous robots into warehouses for the first time in history. And so they're doing the drudge work. They aren't good enough to do heavy work yet, but they're doing the drudge work.
And maybe we'll start seeing more in the fields, as the migratory labor issue, takes precedence.
Well, in fact, again, you all probably know this. If you look at the agricultural autonomous robot market as a separate market, that's where there's the most activity right now in terms of both venture work and tools that really work. Some of the tasks are pretty straightforward. There's several companies making autonomous micro robots that roam and do spot weeding. So they go up and down the rows, and the sensors can see where you need the specific either pesticide or fertilizer, and do micro weeding, micro pesticide disperse. That's not crazy. It's already feasible. Picking strawberries turns out to be one of the hardest ones to do autonomously. There's at least 4 companies that claim they've conquered that. Because it requires both the image system to see that the strawberry is in fact ripe, and then the grabber has to be as dexterous as the human grabber, not ruin the strawberry, tug and. But that'll happen so I've written this in my book for the obvious reason. Who embraced automation first when it came to the industrial age in an industrial sector? Farmers. Farmers embraced it first a century and a half ago, and then the next century. And I think the farm community will embrace it first again, and already is. But they were then and they are now a very tough, show me kind of community. If the thing really works, well, I'll do it. And I think that's why we'll see a lot of this there first. Yeah.
And back to the weeding. Sorry, I need to let somebody else take a question. But they've started playing with directed energy. Part of this MAHA movement of getting away from some chemicals. You have basically a robot with a laser that can kill weeds. So.
Well, it's certainly healthier to not overuse chemicals on a farmland. And if it were also cheaper, then this is not a complicated adoption metric, right? That's what it's really being driven by. It's cost efficacy. Yeah.
Thank
Same
you
page.
very much. Thanks, everybody.
Oh, yes, sir.
Hey, I got one over here. Jordan Lamb, Hawaii Electric Cooperative. I just had a question on, there was one slide that you had that stated the roadmap to 1 gigawatt of generation production. And we were looking at the different tiers, nat gas, diesel generation, nuclear. I think the verbiage you used on that was that you thought you could put on a gigawatt of nuclear south of $10 billion versus north. Do you have an actual dollar amount that it takes to put nuclear on for baseload gen?
Yeah, well, so we actually have there are good data on that because a lot of people are building nuclear plants around the world other than us. So if we just use global data, then what you're finding is the gigawatt is coming in at around 5 billion. 5 to 7 depends on the country. So if you look at every nation, including China, is building them now. The Chinese are building them fairly quickly, but not as fast as sort of clickbait. So it's 5 years from breaking ground to commissioning, but there's obviously a number of years prior to that for site selection and different things. But they're building them, and they're building our designs, as you know. So it's not like they've invented a new class of reactor. So the biggest variable for the money is the time, as you know, for construction of things that are that expensive. So you find typically the cost escalators are disconnected from the size of the reactor. This is, by the way, true for 50 years. Small reactors took about as long to build as the big reactors. The reason we went to scale is that if you're going to take 5 years to build something, why not build a gigawatt instead of 100 megawatts?
So you are preferring to do the large scale versus the SMRs that are more mobilized. You're stating that they take roughly the same amount of time to.
Well, I'm not preferring, I'm stating, making an observation of fact. You can't order an SMR today and get it built because they don't exist yet. There's 160 different designs for SMRs in the world. 100 of the designs are in the United States. There's lots of designs. There are dozens of companies that are fairly far along in building a first of a kind. When you finish the first of a kind, but all engineering, especially for things that have high reliability, high consequence, you have to build the second of a kind, based on lessons from the first of a kind after you've operated it for at least a couple of years. And then you have to build a supply chain around the specificities of your design, not just the fuel types, but a variety of other things. So different designs have different velocities for that, but none of them exist yet. So if you were a merchant, a buyer of a gigawatt, and you were willing to wait 6 years, and you assumed that there were not a regulatory impediment, just from an engineering perspective. The only two things you could get built based on what we know how to build right now is a gigawatt coal plant or a gigawatt nuclear plant. I would make the bet the coal plant is politically easier to get built than the nuclear plant, not because of the politics of coal, but because of the challenge in the supply chain of the nukes today in the United States. It takes time to rebuild our infrastructure, our workforce. And this is true if you want to build 10 100 megawatt so-called SMRs or 100 10 megawatt SMRs. There's no supply chains for these things. They haven't been built yet. We have ideas and we know how to build them. There's no new physics here. So it's not, I would prefer, I'm just saying I think both should happen. I think we should order nukes now. They should be ordered now, and let's get the thing going. That means you have to order the existing GE and Westinghouse AP1000s, the GE 600s. And you order those today, they'll get built. Stipulating the regulations don't stop you and we don't have lawsuits. We should also fund the hell out of a whole fleet of next generation nuclear plants because there's lots of applications for those, no question about it.
And last follow-up on what I mentioned then, you mentioned regulatory issues. Where do you see, or maybe this is outside of the wheelhouse, but where do you see the feds taking this? Would they prefer coal versus nuke? Is there any difference between the two base gen types?
Coal versus nuclear regulations? They're both.
I guess my question would be, is there something that the current federal organization or the presidency would like to see preferable built?
Yeah. We have significant bipartisan agreement that everybody loves nuclear power again. But everybody doesn't love it. There are still lots of anti-nuclear activists already laying down groundwork to oppose new nuclear construction. But there is significant bipartisan agreement, sufficient that I think we would, with the right kind of creative approach to a redo, if you like, a permanent redo. It can't just be by fiat, by executive order, of the regulatory structure for nukes I think that's doable. There is certainly not bipartisan agreement on building net new coal plants. So we have I guess I would call it let me call it stealth movement. The momentum of reality is towards more coal, because the velocity of demand and the magnitude of demand ultimately will mean, it's already meaning everywhere else in the world, more coal builds. Doesn't mean just instead of wind and solar builds, it's just more coal builds. So the momentum of reality is pushing the United States towards that too. But to get that to happen, we're going to have some creative politicking and some regulatory backstops, because the risk for either the nuclear or coal developer, whose ever money it is, it won't matter whether it's capital put up by the Magnificent Seven or it's your capital or bank capital. The risk they're going to have is probability that if you ordered it tomorrow that you'd have it built and running before the next presidential election is 0, right? It's not far away. And you were going to worry you're going to get keystoned on your project after you put, you're in for $2 billion with another 2 to go or whatever, So that has to be fixed for both classes of energy in some fashion. I'm not privy to know specifically whether it's being fixed. I know a lot of people on both sides of the aisle want to fix that, some more enthusiastically than others. So I'm modestly optimistic that we have a shot at legislation that will make it possible, but we'll see.
Well, you had some really compelling presentation slides there. I appreciate you coming. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, we have time for one more question.
Quick question on the data center loads. Discussion that we can maybe turn variable to solve some of our peak demand issues?
Yeah, it's one of the most interesting technical debates going on in the power community, in data center power community. And I find it interesting anyway. I was on the board of directors of an architect engineering firm that designed power systems for data centers for a decade. I was at the front lines of these kinds of questions. The short answer is in 2 parts. Yes, it's possible to do some things that can manage peaks, valleys, but it's much more difficult with data centers on average than it is with other kinds of loads. Economically, data centers to the grid provider look a lot more like a big glass plant. I mean, if you lose power to a big ceramic or gas plant and the melt goes cold, it's dead. I mean, it has to run, the big kilns have to run 24/7 for the lifespan of the kilns, 15 or 20 years, and they shut the whole plant down, put a new kiln in, right? Data centers sort of operate that way too. The exception is in 2 parts. One is you can shift loads by echoing the data center somewhere else on a different transmission system, as long as the load doesn't have a latency issue. So if you're storing movies that kids are watching after school, and that data center that has the servers is sitting in an area that just had a peak, it may be cheaper to echo that exact data center. It doesn't have to be in the 70 kilometer 0 latency. It could be 200 kilometers away or 300 kilometers away on a different distribution system or different sub-transmission system. And they just turn the data center off, turn it on over there. And you get a brief hiccup on the feed, right? But there aren't that many loads like that. The machine learning load, so the AI has 2 parts, as you probably all know, but to repeat it, you have to learn how to do a task. An AI that can drive a car can't diagnose an X-ray. The AI that can answer your question can't drive a car. So the machine learning is very specific to task. That's a really energy-intensive thing, and that you can slow down and cycle to some degree. Not a lot, but to some degree. So there's a lot of if it's an AI-dedicated data center that's doing machine learning, those gigawatt class ones, they do have episodic, they have a load profile that's weird, unlike other data centers. The inference data centers, which uses a learning to tell you something, drive the car or answer your question, depends on what the inference is about, whether you can cycle them, right? If it's a healthcare related thing, maybe not. So everybody's trying to figure out how to arbitrage that. And there'll be a lot of very clever load arbitrage. But here's the physics and engineering problem. and I apologize for going back to physics and engineering, but sometimes it matters. If you're trying to manage a building like this, it's HVAC system because there's peak loads, and this is is this like a megawatt building, maybe? I don't know. Say it's a megawatt. Dealing with a megawatt here or there, the switch gear for that, I can handle that. Talking to gigawatt, where loads, and you go, oh, I need you to get off grid for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Taking the gigawatt off and bringing it back on, just to forget the energetics of the power plants. The switch gear is crazy, expensive, difficult physics to do. So we're entering new territory, all of which is solvable with the application of money, because the things that we need to do there are just expensive technologies. They're not impossible. Silicon carbide switchgear instead of electromechanical switchgear, more batteries because you'll need some interim megawatt hours of storage, lots of ultra caps to do the rapid cycling. They're crazy expensive, but we're talking about businesses with infinitely deep pockets, disgorging hundreds of billions of dollars a year. So we're gonna see this all kinds of innovation flow into exactly what you're describing. We've got to manage those loads and peaks better, and we will. And so that'll take some pressure off. So let's pick a number. Let's say instead of 168 gigawatt peak that FERC has, that takes 20 gigawatts off it, which would be huge, right? Okay, well, I need 148 gigawatts more of net new power. It's still crazy numbers. That's sort of where my head is. We're going to push the peaks down, but we still have crazy growth.
Thank you, and thanks, Basin, for bringing you in. Great fit for what we're doing here. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.